And we would like to officially welcome you all to week 6 of our Transition to Organic webinar series for crop producers. Today's topic is building soil health in transitioning soils with a focus on soil amendments. This webinar is a collaboration between Community Alliance with Family Farmers, UC Cooperative Extension, and the UC Organic Agriculture Institute. My name is Grace Jackson, and I am the Farmer Services Regional Lead of the Central Valley. I'm going to pass it on to Margaret Lloyd to introduce herself and then on to Katharina Ullman.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Margaret Lloyd, and I work with UC Cooperative Extension as the Small Farms Advisor, covering Yolo, Solano, and Sacramento counties. You, Katharina.
And hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again. My name is Katharina Ullman. I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator with the UC Organic Agriculture Institute and one of the co-organizers, along with Grace and Margaret, of this webinar series. We're so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedules to be here today, and thankful of course, for our presenters for sharing their knowledge here today. Back to you, Grace.
Thank you both. A quick thank you to our funders for providing the resources for this webinar series. Thank you to the CDFA Office of Agricultural Resilience and Sustainability, CDFA's State Organic Program, and the USDA Transition to Organic Partnership Program. This webinar will be available to watch on the UCOAI and CAFF YouTube channels. We have already started adding those recordings to YouTube, so make sure to check out the links. And you will receive an email every week with presentation slides and resources following each webinar. Usually I send that out on Fridays. The structure for today's webinar is this brief welcome, which we'll finish up momentarily. We'll begin with our first presentation, followed immediately by our second presentation. We will save hopefully about 10 minutes for Q&A. Then we will launch into a few closing announcements and a closing poll. And then we'll spend the last 45 minutes or so in office hours with our presenters for a continued discussion and question and answer. So we hope you'll stick around with us through the duration of office hours. We have a resource guide that accompanies this webinar series where you can access Zoom links, presentation links, additional resources, and optional OSP homework if you're interested in following along with our OSP homework prompts throughout this series. And we will put that link in the chat shortly. And Katharina, passing it back to you.
Thanks so much, Grace. So we are in week 6 of this 10-week series. Today, we're going to be hearing about soil amendments. This is the second part of a 3-part soil health series. We heard about soil life last week and how to train microbes from Joji and Scott, and we'll be hearing about cover crops next week. But we're super grateful to have 2 wonderful presenters with us today, who I'm now going to introduce, who are going to be sharing their knowledge about soil amendments. So for the past 10 years, Margaret Lloyd has served as the UC Cooperative Extension Small Farm and Organic Farm Advisor in Yolo, Solano, and Sacramento counties. She leads research and extension programming for diversified organic farmers in her region. She'll be speaking first, and then after that, we'll hear from Jim Durst. Jim is the owner and founder of Durst Organic Growers. He and his wife, Deborah, planted their first organic crop back in 1988. They now grow a mix of organic fresh market annual and commodity crops in Yolo County, California. So thank you so much for being here. With that, we're going to pass it over to you, Margaret, so that you can share your screen.
All right. Thank you. Let's see here. How's that?
We can see it. It's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for the introductions, and I'll get started. So the focus of today's talk is on the soil amendments piece. And a couple of key points and themes that you'll see through this presentation are that in organic production, there's a significant reliance on biologically regulated nutrient release. A second big point is that organic crop yields can often be nitrogen limited. There's a big reliance on compost and cover crops, but I just said compost here since we're talking about amendments, and a focus on practices that build long-term soil health and fertility. So those are kind of the big themes that you'll see throughout the talk today. And I'm going to begin with soil organic matter. Soil organic matter is kind of like the engine room in our soils and in our planter roots. And this is a slide that you saw last week from Joji, describing how soil organic matter is a big key to soil health. It's this biologically active and inactive part of our soil. It has both living and dead microbes. It has the cation exchange capacity, so kind of the functioning of the movement of different cations, important plant nutrients in the soil. And it's critical in the formation of soil aggregates. And this is important for the movement of air and water in the soil and the general environment that promotes root health. So going a little bit farther, the soil organic matter, thinking about fertility specifically, is a really important source of phosphorus and iron and copper and zinc. And those cations are important, really key for holding on to nutrients. And at the core, thinking about fertility and nutrients are the organisms. So early organic literature, like from Rodale and even before Rodale, this expression, feed the soil and the soil will feed the plant, has been kind of the organic adage. And this is hearkening to the life that is in the soil that is mineralizing nutrients, that is breaking bonds that are holding nutrients to the soil and need to be broken in order for roots to access them. And that is processing a lot of the crop residue and other residue that has nutrients tied up in it. And organic production relies much more heavily on this soil life. And so thinking about nutrient management has a lot to do with thinking about food sources for the microbes, environmental conditions for the microbes, having air, moisture, the temperature, and those in turn will influence nutrient availability. And so it makes the prediction of the timing and amount of nutrients much more challenging in organic production. So these are biologically regulated nutrient releases. I'm going to touch on just some basics for a couple macronutrients. First is phosphorus. And I have some basic parameters in the top for what you're shooting for to have adequate soil phosphorus levels. And this would be revealed through a standard chemical soil test. And phosphorus is generally insoluble and requires microbial activity to become plant available. And so organic matter is highly correlated with increased and improved access to the organic phosphorus and the organic phosphorus pool. Because organic growers are relying on this microbial activity to access the phosphorus, mycorrhizal fungi are one tool that some organic growers use. And while the fungi are not adding phosphorus, they're improving access to the phosphorus. And so fungal hyphae are much smaller than a root. And so the hyphae can get into smaller aggregates, and they have the ability, the enzymatic ability, to break phosphorus off of soil surface, uptake it, and transfer it to plants. So in low phosphorus soils, especially, mycorrhizal fungi have been shown to improve phosphorus levels in plant tissue. As phosphorus levels become sufficient or high, the mycorrhizal fungi play a lesser role in that transfer. But you will read about and hear about organic farmers adding mycorrhizal fungi to their crops through an inoculation. You can purchase mycorrhizal fungi and do root dips and incorporate and plant your crops with added mycorrhizal fungi. The most common sources of added phosphorus are typically from manure-based compost. Because compost is added for other reasons, like nitrogen and adding soil organic matter and adding soil carbon, it also comes with a lot of phosphorus. So typically, organic farms that rely on manure-based compost tend to supply sufficient amounts of phosphorus. It can even become a problem and encourage a transition to non-manure-based compost. Other sources of phosphorus is rock phosphate. Rock phosphate is challenging because it's very unavailable as a mineral, and so it requires a lot of enzymatic breakdown, and so it may or may not become bioavailable in your soils based on the pH and other soil qualities. So there's a bit of site-by-site evaluation to see if rock phosphate is a good fit for your soil. Other common ones are cottonseed meal, soy meal, bone meal, and bird and bat guano. And how one chooses these can be based on a number of factors that are a little bit more pragmatic, such as the cost, local availability, your preference for buying locally or nationally produced products as opposed to imported. So there can be lots of different reasons about how you choose some of these different types of amendments. Looking at potassium, another essential macronutrient, so it's required in large amounts for plant growth. And potassium, unlike phosphorus, is not regulated by microbial mineralization, and it's not being as tightly held onto the soil surface. So it's soluble from residue and is driven by water movement. And so this occurs rapidly. It's not influenced by the carbon-nitrogen ratio or the residue decomposition rate. So it's a little bit easier. The common sources of potassium for organic growers include just incorporating crop residue, whether that's from your cash crop or your cover crop. Otherwise, potassium sulfate is a common one that can be used as a fertigation or a pre-plant treatment. Langbonite, which is a sulfomag, is another material. Kelp meal provides some potassium. There's potassium in composted manures. And some recent work has been looking at some locally available nutshells, like almond nutshells. And this may or may not work because of the C to N ratio in soils, but there are some local products that could be interesting based on where you intend to use these. But by and large, the most challenging organic nutrient to manage in organic systems is nitrogen. And this is because it is largely added in these complex organic forms, so as cover crop residue or compost. and it requires mineralization. So this breakdown process in order to become plant available ammonium or plant available nitrate. In conventional farming, you can directly add ammonium or nitrate. And so when you add it, you know exactly how much you're adding at that time points, and it's a straightforward calculation. In organic farming, there are these dynamics at play because all of this is regulated by microbes. And so when you receive that nitrogen and how much will depend on the moisture and the temperature, as well as the quality of that product that you've added. What is the C to N ratio of that product? So I'm going to focus a little bit more on nitrogen now because it tends to be the most challenging of the nutrients to get right in organic. And it's so significant for crop health and yield and growth. So what I have here is a figure of the different pools and contributions of nitrogen from different sources. And
Margaret,
we'll start at the,
sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you. Can you slow down a little bit for the
yeah.
interpreters, please? Thank you.
Okay, you might have to ask me again, but I'll try. Okay, so this here is a visualization of each of those sources. So we'll start at the bottom. You can see my cursor, I think. This bottom band, which is a little bit light brown, is the soil. And this represents the soil organic matter mineralization. And you'll see this slight increase over time. And that's because in these warm irrigated months, you get this ongoing release of nitrogen from your soil organic matter. And that means you're also going to be getting a slow release of phosphorus and other nutrients that are held onto the soil. Next, we have cover crops. And so if you add cover crop or other crop residue, you have this about 6-week release time before most of what is going to become available that summer has been released. And it's also a really significant source of nitrogen in a given summer. Next, we have the poultry manure, which is this blue band. And you can see this kind of steep curve at the beginning. And that's that quick mineralization that happens when compost is added and mineralized in about 4 or 6 weeks. It does have some slow release over the summer, but it largely happens initially. And then you have granular fertilizers, which is this little purple band. And then you have irrigation water if you have nitrogen in your irrigation water. And so what I think this is really important and telling of is how fertilizers are important, and they're important in closing the gap, but that these other activities of building your soil organic matter, cover cropping, and compost are really significant sources of nitrogen in the organic system. The other really key point that you can see here is how these systems are front loaded. And so cover crop incorporation, compost application, granular fertilizers are added before planting, and they're released pretty quickly in the first few weeks. So you have this buildup of plant available nitrogen before the crop demand. So this dashed line represents the nitrogen demand of a tomato. So this tomato is planted in May. After about 4 weeks, it gets established and really starts to take off. It starts flowering, and that rapid growth accelerates for about 8 weeks before it plateaus and harvest is happening. So timing of plant available nutrition with crop demand is very difficult in organic farming and requires sensitivity to not just the timing of your crop and the release rates, but then also irrigation, which I'll talk about. So if we move on to soil organic matter specifically, about 1 to 3% of the total soil nitrogen becomes available. And this is a significant source, 50 to 120 pounds of nitrogen in that top 12 inches of soil. So here are two figures showing the daily nitrogen release rate. We have one for Yolo County, representing like a hot, warm valley climate, and the Salinas Valley, representing cooler coastal climates. And so one thing you can see is that the warm climates do have a higher peak in the summertime than the cooler climates. And there's a slightly bigger difference between the release rates in the warm and cool seasons of the year. The other thing that stands out are these different curves based on your soil organic matter percent. So the higher the percentage, the more nitrogen will be released. So this reiterates the importance of building soil organic matter as a source of nitrogen for your crop. Another point this figure demonstrates is that the nitrogen release is not consistent throughout the year. And so this engine that's happening in the background of releasing a small amount of nitrogen on a daily basis slows down in those cooler, wetter season and increases in the summer. So that's playing in the background. So it's a small difference in soil temperature between the coasts. It's 4 degrees, but it makes a significant difference in the mineralization rates. So in Yolo County, from April to September, in lower soil organic matter soils, it's about in the 30 pounds of nitrogen, and higher up to more than 70 pounds just in the summertime. And on the coastal climate, it's a little bit lower, also in the 30s to the mid 60s of plant available nitrogen. Over the whole course of the year, these numbers are about 60 to 120 pounds of nitrogen. So it's pretty significant source over the year. And because these are microbially driven processes, we can see clearly here how temperature, moisture, and soil organic matter percent are influencing the availability of soil plant available nitrogen. So in summary, the soil organic matter crop residues provide carbon inputs that slowly build the soil organic matter. And one indicator of soil health in the soil health world is the percent soil organic matter. So this is a really good part of your soil test to monitor and aim to keep increasing it. As you look at your soil analyses over time, that number can kind of jump up and down if that soil analysis was taken at different times of the year and before and after different crops, et cetera. So be aware of what could be affecting that and if the trend is able to be stable or increase. So when we think about nitrogen, the main sources of fertility for nitrogen are compost, fertilizer amendments, liquid fertilizer amendments, cover crop residue, and soil organic matter. Because today we're talking about amendments, I'm going to focus on the first three. And last week you heard more about soil organic matter, and next week you'll hear about cover crops.
So, Margaret, you have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. So available nitrogen from compost. Now we're at the blue bar. So thinking about organic standards, agricultural feedstocks do not have to be certified organic to be used in compost that can be used on organic farms. I think one big one is there's no biosolids and sewage sludge that's allowed to be used in organic compost. You can't see this very well, it's tiny, but there is this really nice chart. I have the link above, and I can drop the link in the chat. But this is a nice table that lays out what's allowed and not allowed. Let's see.
I can add it to the chat for you, Margaret.
Okay. Okay, there we got it now. So I'll have a few other links I'll add to the chat. So in California, we have the Organic Input Material Program, and you can ask your local compost supplier if they have this registered organic input material. So CDFA monitors which suppliers are following to the organic standards and can give them this seal. And in this link, you'll see that you can have a list of registered organic input material. So you can go and find a local compost supplier who fits this. And it's important to recognize that your nutrients, specifically nitrogen from compost, are going to significantly vary based on the type of compost that you use. So if we look at poultry manure, you're going to get about 30 to 35% of nitrogen that's in that, whereas composted yard trimmings does not really supply much nitrogen in the short term, and it can even tie up nitrogen. And so this has significant impacts on crop productivity and is a common mistake early in transitioning to using compost in cropping systems. And this is because the carbon to nitrogen ratio is the decisive factor for predicting nitrogen release from organic matter. So if you're able to get the C to N ratio from your compost supplier, you can use that to understand how this might be released. So here's a curve, for example, and this is available in our document that I'll share. Right here at 0. So this is available N in 12 weeks. You have 0 available and even being tied up when it goes below that line. So it's right at about like 15 to 1. I think that's a good threshold to keep in mind, 15 or 20 to 1, where you risk immobilizing nitrogen. And so this means it can rob nitrogen. It will take nitrogen from the soil, which means your crops don't have access to that nitrogen. And any compost supplier will be able to provide you with an analysis that looks something like this. And on it, you can find the C to N ratio. So this one is 11 to 1. We scoot back. You can find it here. Okay, we're in a positive. Oops, and maybe even at 11 to 1, we can estimate maybe 20, 25% release of the total nitrogen.
Hey, Margaret, sorry to interrupt. For some reason, we can see like a small screen of your PowerPoint presentation. Do you see that? I see your cursor on it. I wonder if you can exit out of that or move it to another screen. Okay. Can you try presenting again?
Are we back at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay. Let's jump ahead then. Better?
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at granular fertilizers. There are a lot of granular fertilizers. Here's a short list of some common ones. And you can see that some of them are really concentrated in nitrogen, but not other macronutrients, potassium and phosphorus. Whereas many of them do have a mixture. And so looking at your soil test, that can help you guide which type of material you want to be using and adding to your soil. So just like how you saw the different release rates for compost, we see that also for different types of fertilizers. So you can see how guano is a very available fertilizer in terms of nitrogen, followed by the blood and feather meal. These granular fertilizers that are pelleted manures, like a 442 or something, are also pretty available, about 50%. So there's some good guides, and this estimating nitrogen availability in organic annual production, it's UCANR document 8712, is where a lot of these slides are. And we give an annual workshop on this. So to learn more about nitrogen availability from compost or from in organic production. So looking at liquid fertilizers, kelp and seaweed extracts, compost teas, coffee grounds, these soy protein hydrolysates are a newer one that's on the market that folks like. They're pretty high in N, 14%. One of the early materials that people still use are these fish emulsions. And also some of these other animal-based products can be run through irrigation lines. There's been some new materials on the market that are manure-based ammonium and nitrate fertilizers, which means they're very available. They are immediately plant available, and that's unique and is a little bit more like a trade of a conventional conventional nitrate fertilizer. So, and then there's some interesting like fermented and processed fertigation products. And you'll see that some of these organic fertilizers, quote unquote, are also trying to get at feeding your soil organic matter or feeding your microbes that stimulate the release of your soil organic matter. And so there can be a blurry line sometimes about feeding the microbes versus adding nutrition to the soil.
Hey,
So
Margaret.
Yeah.
Are you wrapping up?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So in general, liquid fertilizers are pretty available between 50 and 100%. And the manure-based ones tend to be more highly available. But the plant-based liquid fertilizers are also pretty good. So I think I'll end by sharing some resources. So when it comes to selecting some of your inputs, you'll want to look to ensure that they meet the National Organic Plan standards. And there are lots of resources. I can drop all of these in the chat, so you don't have to screenshot this page. I also wanted to share some really great books. There's the Western Fertilizer Handbook has a chapter for organic production. The Organic Vegetable Production Manual is also a good primer. And then the Estimated Nitrogen Availability in Organic Annual Production, the 8712 document. So I'll stop here and let Jim Durst take over.
Margaret, while Jim is getting set up, maybe we can ask you one of the questions that came up in the chat box. And that is, do earthworms help with nitrogen and other macronutrients? And you're
Margaret,
muted right
you're
now.
still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, the literature suggests that earthworms can be an important contributor to helping release nutrients in the soil. So because earthworms play a big role in breaking down crop residue and even chewing other soil aggregates into smaller pieces, and the enzymes in the gut of earthworms help further break down and mineralize these materials, so they can help accelerate and contribute to the bioavailability of nutrients.
Thanks so much, Margaret. And Jim, your screen is looking perfect. So
very good. Thank you.
I think you're ready to go. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And um, we're very fortunate to have some really Margaret as a very fine presenter. She's has a lot of experience working on lots of organic farms, and I hope that I think probably some of you may be transitioning to organic. Um, my wife and I, Deborah, started farming about 35 years ago organically. And we started out with 3 acres, and we currently farm around 800 acres. And it's a little bit larger scale. It's just grown through the years as opportunity and knowledge built. And our main crops, we're in Yolo County in west of Sacramento up against the foothills. And the area that we farm in is called Hungry Hollow. And this picture just kind of depicts where we are in relationship to the hills. I got it. Yeah. Our main crops are asparagus, which is a spring crop for us. It begins in about 20 days, and it follows through till around the 1st of June. And we also grow fresh market tomatoes of various sizes and varieties, and we've been doing that. That's probably been the mainstay of our agricultural production for a lot of years. We have, I think, around 130 acres of whole and stake tomatoes. And we also grow seedless watermelons. And as part of our rotation, we grow grains and alfalfa, winter squash, snap peas, and a number of miscellaneous vegetables. And in terms of this presentation is about amendments, but you can't talk about amendments without talking about soil. And Margaret did a good job about talking about organic matter and cover cropping. And some of this you're probably going to hear from other farmers later on. So I'll try to keep it focused, but I can't talk about amendments without talking about soil. And so, I think what are the basic principles for building a healthy soil biome? And understanding the microbiology and the relationships of the players in the soil structure, minimum tillage, minimum disruption, cover cropping, and adding carbon. And then I'll talk a little bit about soil amendments that enable healthy plant production, and in soil amendments that enable healthy yields. And then a little bit about sources and costs and sustainability of those amendments. And then what does a long-term vision look like? We farm a couple different types of soils. This is a heavy clay soil, and this is a shovel full of soil that was turned over after the cover crop was mowed. And you can see the root activity that's going on, that's happening at this particular point. And you can see evidence of a lot of the different players that are working in the soil right now. So this area around the roots we call the rhizosphere. And as Margaret touched upon the different types of microbiology that is in the soil, include bacteria, fungi, protozoa. And, just 1 tablespoon contains 50 billion microbes. So we're talking about a lot of little critters in a field in the soil. And the mycelium web is that point of interaction between microbes and between plants and microbes. So, I always kid that there's a conversation going on all the time between the soil life and the plants that are existing there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about cover cropping. I think next week you're having more extensive cover crop presentation. But cover cropping, I define it as intentionally growing organic matter to feed the soil fauna, to feed the microbiology. So this is a picture of a cover crop on our farm in the spring, probably April, mid-May, somewhere in there. And there's a tractor pulling a rotary chopper. Although we do things, we have bigger equipment. This could be done on a road bed with a lawnmower. There's lots of ways to do it. But the important thing here is to look at the amount of biomass, in this particular, the amount of carbon that's being returned to the soil. And the chopper does nothing more than take all that biomass and put it in smaller and
Y
smaller.
toma toda esa biomasa para poner.
Is take all that biomass and put it in smaller and smaller pieces. The smaller the piece, the quicker it breaks down. So we want to have all of this carbon-based product come in contact with the soil for rapid decomposition. There's different ways we can do that after mowing. This particular disc this is a wheel disc, and it's 25 feet wide, and it's set up with tires on it. And we work the soil only down to 6 inches deep and no deeper, because we have drip irrigation installed in each of these beds, so we don't want to disrupt our irrigation system. So this disc is taking that organic matter that's laying on top of the ground and mixing it in with the soil to make the initial contact. And this is a good example of, this is a sandy loam. You can see the difference in the texture, but you can see the roots, and they're already covered with dirt, but all the organic matter that we're putting in there is getting mixed in with the soil. So it's preparing it for contact with the microbiology. Here's another different type of corporation tool for cover crops. This is one that we built, and it's modeled after an asparagus disc. And what it does is, if you want to maintain the integrity of your beds, it does another, and it works a little bit better in wetter conditions. And this is another type of, we have 2 or 3 different pieces of equipment, because every year is different, and the soil and the moisture and everything comes together. Our cover crops are grown during the winter time. So they're grown at a time when most of our fields would be fallow, and a lot of our neighbors spray herbicides to keep all the weeds out, but we intentionally plant cover crops. This works on a little bit tougher soils and maybe a little bit drier. And then when we're all done, we try to get from the cover crop growing to this point in 4 passes with tractors. And then we're ready to, you can see the cover crop is fully incorporated. It's well mixed with the topsoil. It's only mixed in with the 3 or 4 to 6 inches of topsoil, so it's not plowed under. It's at a point. And then Margaret talked a little bit about CNN ratio, and this is important when you're deciding to apply soil amendments. It's important to understand both the carbon to nitrogen ratio of those amendments. And the lower that ratio, the more available the nitrogen is in there. And when organic matter is added to the soil and root residue, manure, cover crop, the increased carbon triggers microbial growth. So it's like, you almost have to look like you're at a horse race and somebody puts the flag down and all the horses take off at one time. And that's the way it works in the spring when you've added that cover crop and incorporated in. All those microbes that just got the green light to go to work. And if the amount of N in the added material is adequate to support the increased growth of microbes, the microbes will absorb N from the soil and immobilize it in their tissues. And this will deprive any subsequent plants of that nitrogen for a period of time, depending upon moisture and temperature and how quickly those microbes are working. Cover crops and especially legumes, if you're growing cowpeas or fava beans or vetch or something like that, they have a C/N ratio that's generally about 25:1. And as a rule, these plants decompose relatively quickly because of the amount of carbon contained is offset by adequate amounts of nitrogen that is not immobilized, that's available to them. No, low nitrogen, high carbon residues such as wheat straw, grasses, if they're in a non-green stage, they don't have a lot of nutritional quality for microbes, and it could take longer to decompose. An almond hull, a shell. So C and N ratios provide clues about the microbial population present, as higher ratios tend to support more fungi present in the soil than bacteria. It's also good if you're going to be growing a crop and you want to apply amendments, how much do you put on? And sometimes this is a roll of the dice, but there are certain formulas that we as farmers use to try to estimate how much nitrogen we need to have available for the plant through its growing season. So like here, if you're growing fresh market tomatoes, that plant is going to have a diet of 240 pounds of nitrogen through its growing and production period. Broccoli is 350 pounds. And the thing about some of these heavy feeders is that all that nitrogen doesn't necessarily leave the field. Some of it will go out in terms of the crop, but like broccoli, you have a big plant, you're only cutting the crown, but the food source, the rest of that, all the leaves and the roots and stuff, they contain tremendous amounts of nitrogen. And when you work those back in, you're recycling that nitrogen back into your biological system. Another thing that is difficult, sometimes it's hard to determine how much of what to put on. And we use two different tools to monitor the health of our soil and the health of the plant. You're looking here at two different plant tissue analysis forms from tomatoes, and one is from 719 and one is from 621, so different times of the years. A tomato plant, and I'll use tomatoes because I'm probably the most familiar with it, but tomato plants can be in the ground for 90, 120 plus days. And as you know, a lot of the nitrogen that we apply pre-plant, whether it's coming from our cover crop or coming from an amendment, is a lot of it is either not available or it is gone before the plant reaches the end of its life. And as growers, we don't want the plant to get all the way up to flowering and setting fruit and start to run out of nitrogen. Nitrogen is a very key component to yield and fruit sizing. So, we're looking at our sap sampling when the plants are 6 or 7 feet tall, or even if they're growing in a smaller stage, about once every 3 weeks, we go through and cut off some of the new growth off the tops of the plants. And then we send that to a lab and they extract the juice out of it and they analyze the juice. Now, if this is a plant that is like in June, that is actively growing, you can see yellow deficiencies in nitrogen, and that's probably a good thing. That means that plant is growing and it's using all the available nitrogen that's there. And it's kind of an indicator of the point of growth for that plant. And you can see the same thing with calcium. Calcium is another nutrient that gets utilized very quickly when the plant's growing. So we use these sap samples to kind of inform us about if we should be running nutrients through our irrigation water and at the different point of the plant's growth cycle and what is needed. If you're looking at things like sulfur, plenty. If you're looking at things like zinc, plenty. And if it's funny because you can look at this same picture in a soil sample and it would be almost completely reversed.
Hey,
So,
Jim, you have about 5 minutes left.
okay, I'm gonna hurry up. And this is a soil sample looking at right here from a similar field. And we're looking at the pH of our soil is something we monitor regularly. We want to keep, we don't, some of the soil amendments tend to offset pH and increase it if they're high in salts and when this is some of the factors that we use when considering a soil amendments. One is the cost. What does it cost? And when does it become available to the plant? How does it affect the soil pH, salinity? Are you introducing weeds or pests with the product? What is the effect on the soil biome? Availability, can I buy it and get it tomorrow? Or do I need to wait a month? You got to be thinking ahead. Environmental costs, how does it come, where does it come from, and how much of it is, what is the manufacturing process? We used to use a lot of Peruvian seabird guano, and it finally became too expensive. So to use, it's a very good product, but the environmental cost is tremendous. It's mined off the coast of Peru, and it's manned by hand labor, and it's put in bags, and it's put on ships, and it's shipped to Long Beach, and it's unloaded, and it's put in bigger bags, and it drives by trucks to our farm, so it's a lot of transportation. It probably takes as much carbon to get it here as it does that it produces. What are the most sustainable sources of soil amendments and how do their costs compare? Evaluate amendments not for the short-term gain, but for the long-term soil health. These are all questions you should incorporate in your screen when choosing amendments. These are some of the amendments we use. We use poultry manure or poultry manure-based compost at a rate of 4 to 5 tons per acre. This is in conjunction with cover crops. Banding concentrates the amendment right underneath the plants, so you can actually double or triple that amount per acre if you band it. Potassium sulfate is mined at 0.050. We apply this through our drip system. Gypsum, calcium and sulfur both. We apply that through our drip system. True has some products out there and through other companies, pelleted poultry manure, which is heat treated so it meets the requirements for organic production to be harvested within 90 days. Vermicompost, we use that. It's 500 pounds to the acre banded. Soy hydrosylate, we water run that at it's 16% nitrogen. We water run that during the growing season. And at drench water, when we transplant, we also use corn steep. Not only has nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, it also has molasses, which feeds the microbiology. How do we apply these amendments? This is a spreader that we use. This one, if you look towards right behind the tractor, there's a bar that goes across that has 3 shovels that open up a channel in the center of the bed. This particular unit is putting on gypsum. This particular unit is putting on granulated poultry manure. It's dropping it in. We come back later and we reform the beds and close up this. So, and then the plant is planted right on the middle. Here's another. This one we have it opened up. This one's putting compost on top of the gypsum in the field before we close it up. So we're putting 2 amendments in the same line. Oops. This is a broadcaster. This one's loaded up with poultry manure. I think they were putting this on before barley, so it's going into a grain. We have 2 of these units, 2 of these spreaders, and we can spread about 4 truckloads a day. Oops, sorry. This is pelleted stuff that's on the ground. It's in one of the little furrows. This is mixed in with a product called chitin, which is crab shells that have been ground up, and it's an extremely good food source for a lot of microbes. This is mixing a water run nutrient. I think this is soy hydrosylate. Mixing in this tank, it has a paddle wheel inside that blends it. It goes over to an irrigation valve and is pumped directly into our drip system. This particular material is water soluble. Oops. Here's another picture showing the hooking it up. Okay. Yeah. These are some of the suppliers that we use. There's numerous suppliers in various parts of the state. There is a plethora of materials out there that you can buy and use. And to try to go through it all in 30 minutes would be impossible. But some of my suppliers, True Organic Fertilizers, in our area, we have Low Plus Spreading, Spence Petting, Posey. These guys supply manure, compost, and gypsum. Big Valley Ag is where we buy some materials. Central Coast Worm Farm is where we buy our vermicompost. Wilbur Ellis, big supplier, they have a lot of their own products. And Grower Secret provides some specialty items like soy hydrosylate. Our soils are a reservoir of nutrients, microbes, and water. In nature, fertility is maintained by the constant recycling of organic matter. If we are truly to mimic and enhance this process on our farms, we will have to replace all the carbon and other nutrients that leave our farm in the form of food and oxidation. This replacement practice is the essence of good soil stewardship. Understanding which nutrients are leaving and replacing them in the soil reservoir is the basis of good farming practices. Our motto is always leave it better than you found it. Okay, and the next question people ask is, can we grow, especially from my neighbors, can you grow healthy crops with respectable yields using organic amendments and farming practices? This is a field, I think this is winter squash, same, asparagus, barley, steak tomatoes, asparagus. And I think we have to look at organic farming and the amendments we use as farming for the long run. Our soils took millions of years to form and fertility to become established. The only thing that stands between starvation and abundance on our planet is 6 inches of topsoil. This is the true holy ground, and this 6 inches of soil commands our respect and nurture for future generations to survive and thrive. We are responsible to pass this story on to our children's children's children. And the other conversation that has been taking place since the beginning of life on our planet has been between the organic and the inorganic, the microbe and the roots. This established dialogue needs to be honored and seated at the table of life at a place of dignity and respect. And lastly, this is one of my favorite models, that action removes the doubt that theory cannot solve. So sometimes you just got to get out there and do it and learn from that. Thank you.
Wow, Jim, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I see people clapping, virtually clapping for you. Um, if you can stop your screen share, that's perfect. Margaret and Jim, because of the time, we're going to hold questions for our office hours. So we're just going to take a minute to close out this part of the webinar. The first thing, again, Margaret, Jim, thank you for those wonderful presentations introducing nitrogen management practices and soil amendment, and Jim, your philosophy around managing your soils and your crops. For people on the call, if you'd like to learn more about these presenters, you can visit their websites online. Next week, we'll be digging more into cover crops. We'll be hearing from two presenters again, a farm advisor and a farmer, about how they use cover crops and think about cover crops for soil health and nutrient management. And then, of course, we'll stay on the line now with our presenters for the next 45 minutes to answer all the great questions in the chat. So this concludes the formal part of our webinar series.